Great.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the panel about querying agents and traditional publishing. I'm your moderator, Andrea Stewart, and I just wanted to first go around and have everybody introduce themselves. So why don't we go ahead and start with Sebastien? I can see you like right here to my left. So.
Sure. Hi, I'm Sebastien de Castell. I'm mostly known for writing the Greatcoats, which is a swashbuckling adult fantasy series, and Spellslinger, which is a young adult fantasy series, and the Argosy books. And then I have a kind of nutty book coming out this year called Malevolent 7.
Hello,
Alexander. Yeah, sorry.
I'm Alexander Darwin. My debut adult sci-fi is out from Orbit Books in June. It was previously self-published and was acquired, and very excited to be here.
That's awesome.
Rebecca, do you want to just go ahead and we'll...
Sure. Hi, I'm Rebecca Roanhorse. Let's see. Most recently, I guess I have my book here for a handy visual aid, Black Sun, which was nominated for a Hugo, and subsequently lost that Hugo. Let's see. I've also written for Star Wars and for Marvel, and I have about, I guess, 6 or 7 books out in the Between Earth and Sky series and in the Sixth World series.
And I'm Kevin Hearne. I wrote the Iron Druid Chronicles and the Ink and Sigil series, which is kind of in the same universe that carries off where the Iron Druid Chronicles leaves off. And the Seven Kennings Epic Fantasy Trilogy, which finishes up this year with A Curse of Krakens. And I am the co-author of the Tales of Pell with Delilah S. Dawson.
I'm Moses Ose Utomi. I'm a Nigerian-American writer of fantasy. I have my books here as a visual aid. I have a YA fantasy coming out in like 2 weeks. Comes out February 7th. And then I also have an adult fantasy novella. It's the beginning of a trilogy. This one comes out March 21st.
Nice. So you can see we have a broad range of experience here. I think I said that already. I'm Andrea Stewart. I'm the author of the Drowning Empire trilogy. So just a quick note, there is going to be a Q&A section. If you wanted to go ahead and drop questions in the comments, then I will go ahead and check those at the end of our panel. So the first question I wanted to ask was, how did you come to write your pitch or your query? How long did that take you? And what sort of resources did you use? So Moses, why don't we go ahead and start with you?
Yeah, I lucked out a little. I'd taken a certificate in book publishing course in my alma mater. And one of the classes was devoted to querying agents. And so they gave us these really like clear rules on how to go about it. I'm sure there's a lot of methods, but the one I learned was that like you essentially have a 3-paragraph structure. The first paragraph kind of gives a quick synopsis of your book. The second paragraph basically talks about why you're querying that agent, which will include like word count, genre, age range to show like this, you're querying this agent because they represent this field or because they represent another author in this space. Kevin, you were one of my comps for my first book. And then the third paragraph is essentially like, why are you the person to write this book? What connection do you have to the material? What makes you the best person to tell the story? That's kind of the structure I learned, and I just followed it.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to like editorialize that. Did you want me to go next, or?
Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead. Go next, Kevin.
So I wound up getting a list of agents to query from. It's basically called agentquery.com, and it lets you sort agents by genre. And so I just sorted for fantasy agents and then grouped them into little chunks of 6. And then I would send out my queries 6 agents at a time. And when I just got blanket rejections on the first 6, I realized my query letter must really suck. So I had to revise that a little bit. And then, I got a little bit, some nibbles, but nothing solid for the next 2 rounds. But in the last round, or the 4th round, I should say, I got a couple of full manuscript requests and then one representation offer. So 23 agents said no, but I only needed the one to say yes, right?
Right.
So things worked out from there. So I didn't have any. I'm kind of envious that Moses had that training on how to do it right, because it took me a while to figure it out.
I actually wrote my pitch and my query via Twitter. I entered a DV Pit, which is like a diverse voices pitch contest. Back in the day, I guess it was like 2018, maybe. And so wrote my pitch there, got some interest, won a contest where another author would read your query and offer notes. And so I had another author read my query and offer notes, help me tighten it up. And then I researched agents. I just went online and looked at who other authors I liked, or I thought I wrote, sort of like who represented them. And I cold queried those agents. And yeah, that worked out.
So Alexander, I know your process to traditional publishing was a little bit different.
Yeah, it was quite different, I think, and I can talk a little bit about it more because it's kind of a little bit long-winded, and I don't want to take too much time right now. But essentially, what happened was the book was self-published, the Combat Codes, and it was a finalist in SPFBO Mark Lawrence's contest, and that got it some kind of like it revived it a little bit, and actually. Again, this is kind of the short story. I got picked up by CAA due to a film option, and I used that as a springboard to just query some like 2 or 3 agents. And so it was a very untraditional query, pretty much like, this book is going to be a movie. Of course, we know nothing. But I used it, and I was just like, well, this is... for some reason, I'm kind of CA is this giant amorphous agency, as you know. And so I was kind of getting represented them, but like not really. I was just like in there. I was somewhere like in there. Like that, I guess to some extent for authors, they don't really represent authors unless you're like Michelle Obama, but they represent like the book itself, the deal. So I was kind of sort of represented by them, and I just used that to springboard and was able to connect with an agent and a few agents, and had some success there.
How about you, Sebastien?
Yeah, I'm actually a terrible example too, in the sense that I sent out, I think I sent out like 10 or 12 queries, and then but I got my book deal the old-fashioned way, which is I married a librarian and waited until her career was big enough that she was at a conference having dinner with at that time the head of Penguin International and Penguin Canada, whose wife was starting an agency. And then through I do not understand the means by which it happened, but apparently it had something to do with talking about the fact that we had 400 fantasy novels in our garage, prompted this wonderful guy named Mike Bryan, we're friends now, to say, oh, his wife was starting an agency. And so Christina, my wife, had come back to the hotel room. I was just there because I love a good hotel room. And she said, oh, there's this new literary agency starting up, and Heather Adams is starting, and they want you to send your manuscript. And I said, that's ridiculous. You were just having dinner with somebody. They were being polite. And then he sent a follow-up email, and then Heather sent a follow-up email, and then I sent that. So for all my many, many hours of poring over query letters, like I responded with, shall I send you the query letter and samples? And Heather said, no, just send the manuscript. Which is when I sort of realized that the query letter is almost like this weird device in some ways that's like a trap that allows someone to see that they shouldn't read your manuscript, as opposed to the thing that's going to kind of get them to. And I think that's why what Moses said right off the top about like sticking to like the really straightforward process is probably the best bet, I think, for most authors watching. To just like, don't try to kind of be too, I don't know, I'll pass it on now, but just that just recognize that a lot of the ways that letter actually ends up manifesting is as a cue for people to kind of not read the manuscript. And you really kind of just need it to be a gateway to just open the door for them to pick up that first page.
Yeah, I'm a little bit jealous of Moses too, because I didn't take any class or anything. So I was like just scouring the internet and like posting it on like Absolute Right and like I think a couple other websites to try to get some feedback. I queried like 3 different books. So I had like sent out like 85, I think, on one and about like 25 on another and like 35 on the other one. Anyways, it was a long process for me. So it's really interesting to hear how, it's not always the cold querying that gets you an agent and gets your foot in the door with publishing. It can go a different way as well. So another question that I wanted to ask, because I think this is pretty important if you're going the route of traditional publishing, is, they say it's better to have no agent than to have a bad one. But how do you find the good agents? And also, like when you're really badly wanting to be published and you're kind of like just knocking on that door over and over again, how do you actually ensure that you're signing with an agent who is a good fit for you? So let's just mix it up. And Alexander, why don't you go first?
Yeah, again, so I came at it via a bit of an unorthodox path. So again, I want to just have a disclaimer to make sure that it's not necessarily what'll work for everyone that might be watching. And I do think, as Moses and Sebastien said, like kind of following the rules to some extent will probably be better than not following rules most of the time. But then again, that really wasn't the case for me. As far as I've only had one agent, so I haven't had a bad experience, and I love my agent, Ed Wilson. I had spoken to 1 or 2 other agents, and the real difference that I saw with Ed was that he vocally said he wanted to represent me as an author for my career, as opposed to just represent the book. And that was a big deal to me, because that's just like, it makes sense. And if I want to have a career as an author, it's not just about, this book, this deal, this money, whatever it might be. So that was really a white flag to pick Ed over the other agent. And as far as whether it's better to have no agent, I don't know. I'm not sure if that's true or not. I mean, clearly a bad agent is not a good thing, but they might be able to get you in the door. So I'm really not sure on that one.
How about you, Rebecca?
Yeah, I think I agree with what Alexander said about looking for someone who wants to represent your entire career and not just the book. When it came time for me to pick between 2 agents, I had one agent who was like, oh, we can get you a lot of money. We're going to pitch this as YA. This was actually 2016, not 18. So YA was still really hot. We're going to do this and this and this. And I was like, okay, well, that sounds cool. But what do you think of my story? What do you think of in the book she was going to represent? There was a very violent child death in the first chapter. And I was like, well, what do you think about that? And she's like, well, we might have to soften that. And then, so I'm not going to give it away, but at the end, something pretty tragic happens, and it does not end on a happy note, and the book does not. And I was like, well, what do you think about that? And she's like, well, we might have to change that a little bit too. So I was like, okay, so clearly she's not that in love with the story itself. There are things that she doesn't seem to be sort of grasping what I'm trying to do, and where I want to go and what kind of author I'm going to be. So even though she was promising, sort of like flash and money and la 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 la, all this stuff, I could tell she was not going to be the agent for me. Whereas and also just one other thing I want to add, when I was like, well, what editors do you think you want to send it to? Because these are all questions you should be asking before you sign with an agent, because that's their job, is to know the editors and to know the publishers and to help you navigate that. And she was like, well, you don't need to bother yourself with who the editors are. You won't even know their names, And I was like, whoa, okay, maybe not, but you should, and you should be able to like explain that to me. And then the agent I ended up going with, she was like, well, I have a list of 4 curated editors that I think are a good fit for you, and here's why. And so that was a very sort of different response than, the first one I got. And she loved the story as it was. She didn't think I needed to change, the violence or anything like that. So that's sort of what helped me determine what was a good agent for me and who was not.
How about you, Kevin? Did you stay with the same agent that you got your query?
I've actually recently changed agents. And the first of all, what Alexander and Rebecca were saying is also just awesome. And especially Rebecca, all that stuff about how, just really asking the agents, hey, what do you think about this story? And you have to think about, what do you want as an author? How editorial do you wish your agent to be? And with my first agent, I didn't want it at all, because I didn't like his input or his suggestions. They were completely different from what my editor was looking for, and that's why I wanted to go with what my editor wanted. And because I could see that the book was improving, according to what her instincts were. So when it was time for me to switch agents, I had several on the line, and I was asking some of these questions about, here's this pitch that I've got, or this outline I've got for this story. In one case, I actually had a full novel too. So like, here's a lot of material that we could potentially sell. So what do you think of these stories? And what their responses were told me quite a bit about what kind of agents they were going to be for me. So I was at a point where I did want some editorial input into what I was writing, because I hadn't basically had that. I just had the editorial input from my actual editor, but nothing from my agent for all that time. So I wound up going with, Stacia, who is very, very good with her editorial comments. And I thought it was incisive and helpful, and it was going to make my story better. So that's what I was kind of looking for, and I went with her. So.
Moses, how about you?
I mean, this is all good wisdom. I hope everyone's taking notes, because I'm not going to add much. But yeah, I had I had written before. These are my debuts, but before then, I had written a book that I was convinced would be my splash, and I got one offer on it, and it sounded similar to Rebecca's experience, where when I started talking about the book with the agent, it just didn't feel right. The things they were suggesting didn't quite make sense to me. They didn't quite know the market, the specific market I was hoping for, as well as I expected. It was a bit weird. So I didn't have another book, but I backed out at that time and decided just to write something else. And I think if I can offer anything unique, maybe there's, in terms of differentiating good agents from bad agents, or maybe more concerning like honest agents from scammers. Of course, there's going to be a degree of desperation. I think we all know what that feels like when you really want a book to be published. But I also think you have to understand that like predators prey on that desperation. So you have to have a certain amount of confidence. You have to know who you are, know what you want, know who's in your corner, and know that you're not going to let somebody prey on that really awesome instinct you have to get your book out in the world.
How about you, Sebastien?
Boy, I was just so lucky, and I think what it sort of taught me is that, in fact, when you're sort of looking for an agent, as much as you're looking for an agent, you're looking for a relationship with someone, because your agent's kind of really is your kind of co-conspirator a lot of the time, and so you need to. It has to be someone where, and I think this bears out with what Rebecca was saying and what Kevin was saying. You have to feel like you can really trust this person. When I first met Heather, our first phone call, I said I was looking for. There was 3 things I wanted in an agent, and I still think these are the 3 things that I would look for if I needed a new agent, which is someone has to have connections. And the problem with a lot of the people that might kind of whether or not they're predators, they can be entirely sincere, but the people that sort of aren't seriously good agents is they might be interning in an agency that you've heard of that has authors that you heard of, but they themselves have never cracked the deal. And there's a lot of that goes around. There's a lot of people who start at sort of either minimum wage or not even minimum wage, basically. And they're sort of told, okay, well, now you've learned enough, you can try and get clients. But if they haven't made any deals themselves, not through their agency, but themselves, then they probably don't have those connections. And the way that my book got bought was Heather calling up an editor and saying, I want to go for lunch with you, and I want to tell you about this author that I'm really passionate about. And like, you need to kind of someone who's going to create that spark for you. So the first thing for me was they needed to have those connections. The second was they need to really believe in the book. It sounds kind of silly, and maybe other people would disagree with this, and I'd certainly welcome it. But I kind of think like you really want your agent to be a fan of your writing. You want them to enjoy reading your books that they don't think get published, just because they just like your writing, because that sort of means that they get your writing. And then the third thing was I wanted someone that was going to be really transparent with me, like really just tell me the bad stuff. I want to know which editors have turned it down. I don't, like I'm not that kind of a person. I'm the kind of person where I'm more anxious at not knowing what is true than I am at knowing something that is bad. Because if I know something's bad, if I know that, and this is happening right now, I have a mystery novel that I think is like the greatest thing since sliced bread. I love this thing. It's quirky and wild. And every conversation I have with my agent, because Heather retired and put me onto a new agent, also great, John Wood at RCA Literary in London. And every conversation is like, yeah, no, this other person turned it down. But all of that's like information. Like I can use that. I can take that and shape what I do next. But if someone's always sort of trying to do, and sometimes authors get infantilized, where we're like snowflakes, and nobody wants to tell us what's actually going on, then you have nothing to work on. So those 3 things for me, that's the definition. Do they have those direct connections to the editor you want to work with? Are they big believers in writing, and are they going to be really honest?
Yeah, I think communication style is like really important. Oh, I'm sorry. Go on, Kevin.
No, I just wanted to piggyback on one thing that Sebastien was saying about how agencies have interns. That's how I got picked up. I found out years later. I found out like 8 years after the fact that the only reason my agent ever even saw my manuscript, query, etc., was that an intern had read it first and then passed it on. So this is not true for all agencies, but many agencies actually have interns on staff that are the ones going through the slush pile first, and then they are the ones who are kind of filtering things out to actually pass on to agents, and you just have no idea. So sometimes when you get these form rejections, it means that the agent hasn't actually seen your stuff. An intern actually wound up rejecting it. So that happens. Just be aware. I don't want to be discouraging or anything, but it is a thing that happens, and I didn't figure that out until years later. And yeah, I think it's fascinating that is going on, and nobody really knows. And then the agent, some of the agents that rejected me, I wound up meeting them later, and they had no idea that I had ever queried them.
The exact same thing happened to me. Yeah, that exact thing happened. I was at a party. It was after I'd signed the deal, and an agent sort of started talking to me, and I was like, I sent it to you twice, and you guys never even sent a form rejection, and wow. She had never seen it.
So the only thing that I want to add to that is I think that it's okay if you have an offer of representation to reach out to other clients and ask them about their experience with that agent. I've had people contact me about my agent. I'm always very happy to talk about her. I love her. She's amazing. But yeah, I think that is a good way to kind of get the down on like, what is their communication style? How might you mesh? It's just another kind of data point you can use.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, you should do as an author, you need to do your due diligence. You do need to talk to other clients of that agent. I think that communication style that you brought up, Andrea, is very important, because some agents don't talk to their clients except maybe once a month or something. For me, it was very important that I get an email within 24 or 48 hours if I had a question, or if I had if I was freaking out about something. And so my agent does that, and a lot of agents do not. So you have to find what's right for you. And of course, the editorial versus a non-editorial, some agents are, some agents aren't. So you really need to do your research and figure out what's the best fit. And don't get blinded by the promises of being published, because
it's very hard not to, but yeah. Okay, so the next question I had was, what were your next steps after signing with your agent? How did you get from representation to publication, or was it the other way around? So Kevin, let's go ahead and start with you. How about?
After I signed with my agent, then he submitted it to 9 different publishers. 4 of them were actually interested. This blew my mind. Like, I would actually have a choice. And then there was an auction that went on, and I did not have to necessarily choose the highest bidder. But I wound up doing so because as part of that bid was also some marketing stuff. There was a very detailed marketing plan with Del Rey that I didn't see with some other publishers. That was not just like, hey, we're going to acquire this and just, hope it sells. It's more of like, we're going to acquire this and make sure we try to make it succeed, So that was a big deal to me. And then 1 month afterward, in the process, there's this bizarre period between the time when they make an initial deal and then when they actually send you a contract. It's a gray area of 30 days to 3 months to 6 months. I mean, just depends, right? So they start actually getting contract language hammered out. And in that period, they're saying, hey, Kevin, would you like to write the next 2 books now? And then we will publish them all simultaneously, or at least 1 month apart. But, I'm like, that doesn't sound normal. Why would I do that? And they're like, well, here's why, because we will concentrate our marketing for a season behind your debut. And it tells booksellers that we are super duper behind you and you're going to be a big deal. And it lets people who are binge readers actually dive into 3 books all at once, rather than here's 1 book on the shelf that might disappear and then nobody ever sees it. Whereas if there's 3 books on the shelf, the odds of people coming across your name and picking one up are much higher. So all of that stuff was in the favor of that particular scenario. So then I had to write all 3 books. And then once I got finished, I had to wait another year for them to be published. So I was in this bizarre twilight zone where I'm really a published author, guys. You just wait and see. Someday it'll be out there and you'll know that I actually wrote books. So yeah, I finished in 2010, but then I'd written 3 books, but nothing got published till 2011. So that was a weird situation, but I can't argue with how well it worked, because it did seem to work very well. And because it was working well, a whole bunch of other publishers were doing it. And I think bookstores just said, stop, we can't acquire all of these books at once like that. So there was a little marketing fad that was going on right at the time that I was entering the industry, and that has now gone away. But there you go. Sorry about the long story.
How about you, Moses?
I think similar. I think there's kind of a boilerplate of send it out to editors, see what happens. It was a slightly different situation for my 2 books. So for Daughters of Oduma, which I will show again, this one followed the more traditional path. So my agent, Jim McCarthy, who's awesome, he's a genius. He sent it out to different rounds of editors, and then we went from there. We went with an editor that we liked and got it published. For this one, I used to live in New York, and I did a reading of a short story. And the editor of this, Carl Engellaer-Tor, he's also a genius. I'm just surrounded by geniuses. He liked what I wrote and asked me to send him something. And I was not I'm not a prolific writer. So like 5 years later, I reached out to him on Twitter. I was like, hey, remember me from 1996? I have something. And so that went a different route. So it didn't have the same, like, send it to several rounds of editors. That we just went with Carl and went from there.
Sebastien?
It was interesting for me. I had a weird process. My first phone call with Heather, I think she had told me in her letter when she said she wanted to represent me that, you know, she'd just gotten a 6-figure deal for another author, you know, a fantasy author. And so when we talked, I said, she said, yeah, well, so we'll begin the process. And I said, good, I'd like a 6-figure deal and I'd like it in 3 months, please. And she said, well, it's more like it's 18 months and, you know, you've never published anything. So that's not. And I said, I have faith in you. And she thought I was completely nuts. But sometimes I think the key to life is like you make ridiculous statements to the universe, and through some kind of bureaucratic error, yours ends up on the right spot, and some deity, you know, sort of does it. So yeah, 3 months later, my wife and I were on a cycling trip, and Heather said, yep, we've, you know, got this deal. And she was super surprised in her email. She did the one thing for which I will never forgive her as long as I live. She misplaced a comma. And so it looked like she was saying that the offer was for 4 books was 5 figures instead of 6. But because the decimal was in a different place, it was like completely confusing. So I had this very horrible 24 hours of not knowing whether it was like everything you hoped for has happened or nope, you're going to still be doing other jobs. So in that sense, it was smooth. But one of the things that was interesting with Heather, and I don't know if that, it sounds like in some ways that was the case with others here as well. She had a particular notion of kind of who she wanted for me for the book. And part of her sort of vision, I think, was wanting to really pair me with an editor who she felt like would also be the next stage of my development as a writer. And so she really wanted Joe Fletcher, who is, you know, pretty illustrious as a fantasy editor, and she's fabulous, and that was absolutely the case. So for me, I got lucky both because it was the right business deal, but it was also kind of the right creative partnership for me.
How about you, Alexander?
Yeah, so
what was your process like?
I think I kind of was, you know, coming from self-pub, scrappy kind of underdog, have to do everything for yourself. I continued on that trajectory. It was, you know, during the time when I was in the process of vetting agents, and I was like, you know, I did this myself. I'm just going to go out and reach out to editors on my own too. And I made contact with an editor at Orbit, but that kind of was just stagnant at a point, and then I signed with Ed, and as a bunch of you guys have pointed out, connections are really important. That's like one of the most important things for an agent to have. And of course, he had a bunch of his stable of authors had worked with Orbit and had worked with a bunch of the editors there, so he kind of knew and had connections with a bunch of those. So he was able to facilitate that connection I had originally made, and you know, push it to the book deal, the three book deal that happened. And it also, I think what Kevin had said, it as a debut author, it was that gray space between when like I forget what they call it, the initial offer or deal to the actual contract being signed was like, and it's, again, coming from self-publishing, everything being under your control, and being able to just pull the trigger on everything, and it being extremely fast going to that. And I had set my expectations that this was going to be a lot slower, but in reality, everything is so much slower. And I didn't think I was an impatient person until I started with traditional publishing.
Yeah, my submission to editors process was very long and very painful. The first book that went out on sub died on sub, basically. So that was kind of me. So, you know, I did what they say you're supposed to do. I wrote another book, and that went out on submission, and I got some like nice, kind rejections. That was it. And then so I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll just write another book because, you know, you're a writer. That's what you do. You write, right? Mm-hmm. And then that one went out on submission, and we started getting offers like 2 weeks after it went out. And then I got the preempt offer from Orbit. So we kind of had to decide, like, do we go to auction or do we take the preempt offer? And I love Orbit. Like, I think they're amazing. I've always enjoyed their books. I think their covers are great. So, you know, to me, it was like a no-brainer and very like low risk. So yeah, so we took the offer from Orbit. So that's how it worked for me. It's just took me a long time to get there. Got there eventually. Okay, so what about traditional publishing surprised you? So who did we not start with yet? I think Rebecca, we haven't started with you yet.
Well, I think everyone sort of mentioned it, is how long it takes to do things. I had no idea. Yeah, because we sold, the manuscript within a week, but then it took 18 months to hit the shelves. And so, by then you're like, what was my book about? What's going on? Like, I'd already written another book, which I highly recommend actually in that sort of gray period, write another book, because once your first book comes out, your life will change, hopefully, maybe. And then you're going to just you're writing under contract and you're on deadline, and it just doesn't feel the same as when you're like, oh, I can write whatever I want. So that was probably the most surprising. And then I think how invasive social media is. I'll just mention that in case you're not prepared. If you get lucky / unlucky enough to like get popular and hit it big, be prepared for the good, the bad, and the ugly on social media. So yeah.
Yeah, I've heard it's even worse in like the YA space, but yeah. Kevin, how about you? What surprised you?
Mostly recently with the attempted acquisition of Simon & Schuster by Penguin Random House. The stuff that came out in that trial and everything, what surprised me is how little they know about what they are doing. And that the CEO of Random House actually says it's called Random House because we don't know what makes a book succeed. It's entirely random. And that was an actual thing he said. It's just random. Like, well, you've got whole departments called marketing and publicity, and they don't know anything either. So that part was very surprising to hear. But also, like right now, we have Twitter basically becoming non-functional in terms of being a marketable kind of place. Mastodon is a lot of fun. I love the people there, but it is also very anti-capitalist, and you can't really market anything there. So social media in general, unless you're wanting to go onto TikTok, which also has its issues of various kinds, right? So it's very difficult to know what to do in terms of marketing going forward just to get the word out about your book, because maybe more than half the issue is just making people aware that your book exists. So how do you do that now in this very different landscape? And how do you get people to learn about your events? So I think that's the big challenge. And right now it seems like the publishers do not really know how. They're in an adjustment period right now, as we all are. And so we're trying to figure out what's going to work going forward. And I was just surprised that they didn't seem to know what was working and what wasn't beforehand. So,
how about you, Moses?
Yeah, that trial was nuts. Speaking of TikTok, if you're not following Alexander on TikTok, he's got a rockin' TikTok. Please go do that now. I think this is going to sound weird because it's kind of the whole game, but like I think writers tend to either lean introvert or have introverted tendencies. Certainly the writing process as a novelist, it's very solitary. I'm just surprised that people say nice things about my work. Honestly, that's like, it's just weird because it's so in my head. And as Rebecca said, there's this time frame to where like some weird fever dream I had like 2 years ago that I wrote down, other people are accessing it and they're connecting with it in the same way I intended them to. Maybe that's what's weird for me too, is like they get it. I don't know. There's always a concern for me that like, this is my most idiosyncratic strangeness that's manifesting in this book. And then to see somebody else who's like, oh, I totally get what you're going for. This resonated with me. This really makes sense. That is, when I get to like Rebecca, Kevin, Sebastien, when I get to your level, maybe that will become normal. But as a debut, it's wild. It's really strange and cool.
It's the
So how about you? Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, it makes it
Oh, you were
worthwhile,
jumping in?
right? All the pain and suffering. When you connect
does.
with a reader, it's just like, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
How
I
about
was.
oh, sorry. Go on. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say, just to Moses' point, that feeling certainly doesn't go away for me. Like when I get a reasonable amount of sort of letters from readers and stuff like that, and they're always lovely. But sometimes you get those ones that are just I don't like to think of them as fan letters per se. It's that you and they connected with the same thing in the universe, and you found the words to articulate it.
Yeah.
And that sort of that awareness it's almost like realizing that you actually discovered something real. You were never quite sure if it was really magic, like what you thought you had found out there and then put in your story, and then somehow it is, because it's done the job that art is meant to do, which is to kind of awaken something in other human beings. So that part is always amazing. That's a good part. But just quickly on the original question of kind of what surprised me the most about traditional publishing, and this is the thing that still surprises me the most about it, actually day after day. It's how people focused it actually is. And what I mean by that is your book's success is almost more dependent on whether the people inside the company, like everybody on the team that puts it out, is actually bothering to read it or actually likes it, than external forces that you think it's going to be all about advertising and stuff. But most books, when they kind of fail, they fail in-house before they hit the market. And I don't know why this is. I have very little insight on it other than but I've gotten to work with a lot of different publishing teams over the years. And partly I've been really lucky. My books are translated into 15 or so languages, and so I've gotten to meet lots of different people in publishing. And it really kind of comes down to who inside the company is going to the meetings and like holding shaking the book in the air. Because if nobody's doing that, even if you've gotten a really great advance, sometimes you can just watch as the machinery just seems to kind of gum up. And so building relationships where you can, and by the way, if any of my publishers are watching right now, they're like rolling their eyes because I'm horrible at this part, and I'm continuously the person that creates the most conflict. But trying to really just get to know as many people as you can inside of that publishing house that you're working with, sometimes can make the difference that between the book doing really well and the book sort of disappearing.
How about you, Alexander? What surprised you?
I think that's a great point, Sebastien, and I think there's like a positive, just from my experience so far. I think there's not only for the purpose of as you said, getting advocates of your book within the publishing house, but just from a more personal perspective, I find it gratifying just to be able to like meet the various people behind the book, even if it's not my book, but just being able to like interact with the various editors. And what Orbit did, which was really cool. And this is something that surprised me just because I had done a bunch of research on what, like Googling what is a traditionally published author after being self-published. I like was trying to figure it out. There was still a bunch of surprises. Like Orbit did like a kickoff call, and where everyone was on the call, like a bunch of editors that weren't my editor, and the art department, and the publisher, themselves, and that was just really cool. I was not expecting to get to meet all the different people in each department, and it was really cool to see. It's not just this faceless publisher, and I just have my editor, and they're passing everything through them. It's all these very passionate people about books, and they're all at that point. I don't think they were all in office, but I thought that was really cool. And the other thing I found very surprising was, as self-publishing, as I'm sure most people know at this point, it's pretty common knowledge. In order to do it right, you have to run a small business, and you have to be very sharp with your cover and with your editorial process, with hiring people in all these different aspects that a traditional publisher would normally do for you. However, and I thought I had done a pretty good job in each of those aspects: copy editing, editorial, beta readers, etc. I was blown away when I came, to start working with Orbit, and the extra layers that I had no idea happened. First pass, and just the number of copy editors that had their hands in every manuscript, and when you get that manuscript with like track changes, just the number of people that were actually commenting on it. I was saying, this is not one person, this is not two people, this is like a few different voices, and like someone would just pop, as you're scrolling down the manuscript looking at the edits, you're just like, who is this? And you look up who this person is, and you're like, wow, this is great. I want to meet that person. So I was quite, and then just even after that, all the formatting and first pass, it was definitely, I'm sure there are self-published authors, as Sebastien said, like Ben Galley and some of these really, David Estes, some of these really successful ones that have it down to a science and are close to that level of a traditional publishing house. But I was blown away again by how many extra layers there were.
Okay, so I kind of, I know we're running short on time, so I wanted to just jump ahead to audience questions since we have quite a few.
Okay.
I'll make sure we have time for that. So the first question we have is, how important is having an established author platform across social media, especially since most traditional publishers are pushing more of the marketing responsibility onto the author? So how important is that? I'll just start real quick because I kind of joke with my friends that I would like to reach a level of popularity where I can just disappear from the internet and still sell books.
The dream.
So like, I feel like that's kind of like the dream for an author, especially like, Rebecca said, sometimes when you're on Twitter and everything, things can get a little bit of a dumpster fire sometimes. So what are your thoughts on that? Just go ahead if anybody wants to jump in. How important do you think that is?
I think I'm going to jump in. I think some people are naturally good at it, and like I admire them, and it is amazing. And like I see those authors and they blow up and they do great. And I'm like, wow, if only I could do that. Like I hear maybe Alexander, you have a little bit of that going on. But I am not. I'm
trying.
I'm a hardcore introvert, and it hurts. I would just be wary. Publishers have so much more power, and they can reach people you can't even dream of. And they have access to booksellers, and they have a whole sales team. So I kind of am against this whole idea of, push the work off onto the author. Your job is to write the book. Like I didn't sign up to be a marketer as well. I mean, I'm not a self-publisher, and there's a reason, And so I would push back a little on that. I think you probably do have to have some sort of platform. But I also am not a big believer in, and that's not your primary job. Your primary job is to write the book. The reason you're with a publisher is they're supposed to be doing all that stuff for you.
Yeah, just my only advice on social media largely is just be nice and don't express your opinions. Honestly, 100%. I mean, it sounds like a weird thing to say, but I swear to God, I don't see any time where going back to what Alexander had said about like, if you can be an artist and you never need to sell a book to anybody, right? And that's you're as much an artist as anybody else on the planet, right? If what you're hoping to do is is have a readership and sell books and earn your living, like a lot of us have been really privileged to earn our living as novelists, then you are kind of running a small business. And when the head of the local McDonald's goes online and says, I really think Donald Trump's got a lot of great ideas and some of those countries really do suck, like all they're doing is destroying something and to no end. And I don't, maybe others on the panel have more significant philosophical and political opinions than me, but mine are usually pretty ill-informed. Like I'm, pretty dumb about a lot of stuff. So the only thing I try to be good at is just be nice to everybody online and just you're not there to shatter the wall between artist and art. If I mean, you can if you want, but it's just going to be a huge drag. Like if you just see, and YA, like because I'm in YA, I sometimes I get to see what happens to people, and it's not fun, and it takes a long time for people to recover. And the worst part of that, going back to what Rebecca said, is you risk the most precious thing you have, which is your ability to write the best book possible. So that would be that's always a line for me. Go online right up until the point where it's going to affect your writing, and then pull back.
Yeah, for me, it's almost a logistical thing. Like I've been making a push to, again, coming from the self-published, I kind of it's hard for me to discard that kind of scrappy, go after it. Like I would say it's almost a weakness where I'm having trouble relinquishing control to some extent, which is great that I have an agent and editor that are extremely forgiving and fantastic. But from a logistical standpoint, I think it's just about, I see it, the problem with social media platforms is simply time. I mean, if you're a debut author, the amount of, and especially if you're a debut author, you still have a full-time job, like I do. And the amount of time that it requires for any of these platforms like TikTok, the algorithm, all these platforms, the algorithm works on consistency. And that takes a ton of time, and that's time that you're not writing or creating. And I kind of see, like, you can be creative on TikTok. I don't want to, say anything against content creators on TikTok, because there's certainly a lot of very creative stuff. But as far as what we do as authors, I see it as working against some of that creativity that you have to, both spend time on and just like push out content. And that's tough. So I think it's a balance of how much time and resources you have.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have another question here. I'm sorry. Did anyone want to add something? Sorry.
Maybe very quick. Kind of in part echoing what I think Rebecca was saying, is that like it is your publisher's job. It really, that is literally why they're there. But also I think what Alex was saying is important too. And with this whole process, all of it is, you kind of have to decide what you're comfortable with and what you feel you need to do to sleep at night with the project you've created, whether that's the amount of time you put into copy edits and first pass, or this amount of time you put in social media. At the end of the day, it's your baby, and you need to be comfortable with what you did, whether that's constant social media presence or none. There's a quote from Frank Ocean. Somebody asked him why he doesn't do a lot of like live concerts, and how they could get to that level. And he's like, you just got to be comfortable making a little bit less money. And I think like that's always like, there's a trade-off, and you always got to figure out what you're trading.
So another question we have, when should you start querying agents? Can you start when draft 2 is done, or would you recommend waiting until you have a more polished draft? Anyone want to jump in on that one?
You do need to.
Super quick. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kevin.
Oh, it's fine. You're welcome to go. It's fine.
I'll be super quick. Make the best piece of art you can that you know how to make, and then do it, right? Like it's always going to come to that. It's less, especially when you're starting out, it's less a tactical decision than it is just the risk. Is the risk for me, what I experienced is, as soon as you put it out there, all of a sudden your sort of sense of certainty and confidence just kind of becomes driven by other people's responses. So before you kind of show it to anyone else in the world, you should try to make the best piece of art you can. And if you do, it's not going to matter what anybody says. Even if it never gets picked up, you're always going to feel like it was the greatest thing you did. And that's always going to be worthwhile.
Yeah. I mean, I had my complete first draft. I had, a beta reader go through it. And then my agent had made a couple of requests for changes, did those, and that the beta reader had taken place earlier, but the changes for the agent only took me a couple of weeks, and then it was out. So, or I'm sorry, that's actually for submission. I'm sorry, we're talking about when to go to query. I'm sorry. So yeah, I basically did a couple of things to it to fix it up after a couple of partial manuscript rejections, but you're ready to query when you feel that you've got a complete novel. And that novel is something that you can actually write a query letter for if you can pitch it, in a very short couple of sentences, then you've done a good thing there. And the query letter basically is just to get the agent to request the manuscript, and then hopefully you get some notes on that manuscript, or of course, hopefully you get an offer of representation. But if not, some feedback that you can go forward with. So I wasn't even going to send it out. My wife told me to. She said, this is better than most of the stuff I've read. I didn't think anybody was going to want to read about a druid and a talking dog. So I had written it to entertain myself and didn't really think there would be a market for it, and was super surprised when there turned out to be one. So definitely write, as Sebastien said, the art for yourself, and then get it out there and see what happens.
Okay, here's one that I think we probably all have the same answer to. To piggyback off Sebastian's point about opinions, I've heard that it's smart to pull any and all reviews, good or bad, but especially bad, off, say, Goodreads or Storygraph, etc. Any thoughts on that?
Except when you hate James
Yeah,
Patterson.
what do you
I'm assuming they mean, if they're talking about opinions, I'm assuming that they mean
Like pull it, like
reading them.
Read-
Like,
oh.
Yeah, no, I know exactly.
Don't read your reviews.
don't do
No,
it.
that's not. I don't think that's what the question means. I think.
Oh,
what
okay. Well, what do they?
Yeah, I'll just be super quick. I think the question's asking, should you take down your own negative reviews that you have posted online of other books, so as
that's
to
a
not
good
end
question.
up,
that makes sense.
on a call with Kevin Hearne and have him look up what you said that, Hounded was the worst book I've ever read.
Right.
Which didn't happen, because I love the book, but yeah, so it's
post.
that. And I think as general practice, people should stop writing about everything they hate all the time. But I would actually agree. I would probably take down stuff if I thought I'd said something that was going to really hurt somebody as a peer. Yeah.
I don't bother posting bad reviews. I'll gush about the books that I love, but
Right.
there's enough bad reviews out there. I don't need to be adding to it.
I think I have a 1-star review of Charles Dickens on Goodreads because I just personally can't stand
Coming
his
after
stuff.
you.
I had to like teach it, and I refused to. I just can't. I've never finished a book of his. And then I have a review of Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke that I really love. So those are my 2 reviews up on Goodreads: 1 5-star and 1 1-star. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, it's for the readers, right? Not the authors.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think we have time for just one more question. This person says, I am writing a trilogy, currently 120K per science fiction book. If should I be writing my next book in between the first and second? Should it be a completely different book while looking for an agent/publisher? I feel like this is one of those things where there's going to be a huge survivorship bias where somebody goes and like writes the first 2-3 books and they get a publisher. They're going to say, yeah, you should go ahead and keep doing it because then you'll have them all done by the time it gets picked up. For someone like me, I'm going to say, no, write a completely new book because somebody, you might not get it picked up by an agent, you might not get it picked up by a publisher, which happened to me like 5 times. So it's like, I feel like that's going to be something that it's going to depend on what worked out for the person you're asking.
I think if you're being very methodical about like querying and that's your goal and you're just writing, these not one-offs, but not trilogies, it's probably good to do what Andrea said. But at the same time, if it keeps you writing to just write the next book in the trilogy, then I would do that. It depends on you as an author, because end of the day, writing is hard, really hard. So if it keeps you writing to write the second book and you're interested in that and you think it's going to be a good second book, then just do that.
Yeah, I did notice that when I got to the point of getting a book deal and having a 3-book deal, that I didn't know how to write a second book because I'd just written first books. So there's that counterpoint as well. Who knows?
Yeah.
Okay.
I did exactly.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go on.
Oh no, I was going to say
we have a minute left, so.
I did exactly that. I while the first book was out on submission, which was Trader's Blade, I wrote another crazy, weird, stupid book called Spellslinger, and that ended up being the next part of my career. So yeah, it's always, anytime you're writing, you're doing the right job.
Yeah, I wrote Hounded as a book to entertain myself while another book was on submission and supposedly had it. I had no, it was an unagented submission. I wrote an epic fantasy and sent it out without an agent and got some very preliminary positive feedback. And like, we're going to send this to the next level of editor up the chain. But I didn't hear back for a year. So then while I was waiting to hear back, I wrote Hounded to entertain myself. And then I got done and I still hadn't heard back about the epic. It goes to auction. One of the houses, one of the publishers that bid on Hounded was the one that had been sitting on my epic for a year. So that but now I had an agent, and my agent was said, "Hey, you've got his manuscript in a closet somewhere. Do you want it?" They're like, "No, we don't want that one, but we really want Hounded." So that was kind of a funny thing. So it also illustrates the importance of having an agent who can ask them, directly, "Hey, are you going to move on this manuscript?" Because I couldn't do it as an unagented writer, So,
Yeah.
but that's just highlighting what both Sebastien and Andrea. Is it Andrea or Andrea?
It's Andrea.
It's Andrea. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't want to mess it up.
No.
What they were saying is that they wrote something completely different while they were out on submission and for something else, and that's what I did. So I don't know if that's it might be a survivorship bias kind of thing, but whatever is making your brain fire up and get excited about, that's what you should do. Go where the juice is. Always be productive.
All right, we are at 12:01 p.m. So this panel is now over, but I wanted to thank you all for joining me and for answering these questions. I think, it was, if I were an aspiring author, this would have been super helpful to me.
Thank you,
guys. I want to give a shout out
Andrea.
to Moses, who has his debut coming out in 2 weeks. So everyone go
Thanks,
order Daughters of Aduma. Okay, that's a big deal. 2 weeks, your debut book. That's awesome.
That was awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate all of you. This was awesome.
Yes, I've got a whole bunch of new stuff to read now. This is going to be great.
Same.
All right, great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.